Welcome to Liberatory Business. I'm your host, Simone Soul. Thank you so much for watching, listening. Okay, today's a pretty special episode. We're talking about AI, and I've been sitting with some real complexity around this. Because on the one hand, I'm very aware of the real dangers and concerns that come with AI across multiple spectrums. And those are important. They matter. I don't want to dismiss them. But I also couldn't fully plant myself in the camp of people who seem to be so firmly oriented towards alarm and grief and fear and unable to see much else. I felt caught in the middle a little bit, not sure how to think about it in an honest and
I think that's a beautiful shift. Again, it's like with always the pushback to all these things is fear of like my identity and what I thought I was setting myself up for in my life is now having to change, which is so understandable. It's so completely human. And I just try to bring people out of that and say, like, but is it bad for us as a species? Is
rigorous way. And then recently, I had the opportunity to go to Manila to serve as a mentor for an event called Developer Camp. And I had the opportunity to sit and hear a talk that completely blew my mind open about AI. And I went after her and I was like, can you please talk to me on my podcast and basically tell everybody exactly what you just said in this talk? And luckily, she said yes. Her name is Talullah Le Merle. She's an Oxford-educated technologist, investor, and strategist who advises major institutions on AI strategy, and she literally wrote a book on AI. She's someone who lives at the intersection of technology and deep questions about what it means to be human. Her book is actually called A Case for Hope, and her Instagram handle is The Case for Hope. So I hope you are going to go look her up and follow her. But that's exactly what I felt after hearing her talk. I felt hopeful and I want you to feel hopeful. So that's why she's on the show. What I love about Tallulah's take is that she's not selling us on technology. She's got nothing to sell. She's not a techno optimist who thinks that Silicon Valley is going to solve all of our problems. But she's asking what I think is maybe the most liberatory question that we can ask at this point, which is, what if the disruption that AI causes is an opportunity to remember who we actually are, to restore ways of being, knowing, and relating that are ancestral to us, but maybe have been conditioned out of us? That's what we're going to talk about today. We had such a rich conversation that I divided the whole thing into 2 episodes of the podcast. In today's episode, we're covering why it's worth having hope for AI when it comes to jobs, education, and what it means to be intelligent. And I really think the last one might really surprise you. In the next episode, we're going to be covering AI and the environment and mental health. Okay, here we go. I felt so lucky to have met you in Manila through Developer Camp. Not only have you and I had a chance to get to know each other on a personal level slightly, but I also had the opportunity to attend your talk. It was called A Case for Hope in AI. And my mind was just so blown that someone could speak with so much authority in that world, speaking with so much lucidity. And I was able to walk away hopeful and inspired. I was like, not only does this make intellectual sense, this is filling my heart with hope. What's happening? And just in general, on a personal level, you are just so powerful. And I was like, I have a girl crush on her. And so when you said yes to this podcast invite, I was so excited. Welcome to the show, Talullah Le Merle.
Thank you. Yes, we had the best week almost that we got to spend together in Manila. And I loved Simone's talk was amazing forever. I mean, I'm sure you put that all out there, but on collective prosperity, I feel like even before our talks, though, when we got introduced as kind of the support team being mentors and judges, our intros had so many synchronous words in them. We were like, wait, professional kind of business topic and spiritual? Like what's going on? Yeah, figure out what's happening here. It was great.
So one thing I'm going to say that Tula, I'm going to ask her to introduce herself, but she is so impressive and such a powerful person in the world, but is also a total spiritual weirdo, as I like to say. And she is our people.
Yeah, we definitely synced over that.
So please do introduce yourself.
Okay, well, oh gosh. I would say right now, everything that I do kind of spans the worlds of technology and AI and what I call human flourishing. And a lot of the dialogue around tech is about people getting excited about the tech itself. What can we build with it? What can we do with it? Really technical language, lots of jargon. I'm looking more at what future are we moving towards with this technology, and how do we make sure that it's a flourishing, hopeful future for all humans that restores us to more deeply human ways of being, working, relating, loving. And in that context, I talk a lot about, like, humans, we've been on the planet for some time and we've undergone a lot of transitions over that time. We were hunter-gatherers initially. And I know you talk a lot about kind of ancestral wisdom and knowledge inherent with ways we live then. I actually believe this era of human life we're in is rather dystopian for many reasons that we can get into, and that AI arrives as a great disruptor, but could be an amazing thing for us because it disrupts those systems and structures that we're better off without in some cases. Okay, so what have I done? I've spent a decade kind of as a technologist, which I say surprised me when I look back on it because I'm such a humanist. I'm obsessed with, like wisdom, consciousness, exploration, spirituality, psychology. But I was a consultant for 7 years, living in London. I actually have spent a lot of time in the UK because I did my undergrad there at Oxford, and then stayed in London to work. Worked with lots of FTSE 100 companies. That's my background, is in corporate. Like, I had clients like Johnson & Johnson and Mars and HSBC, and it was a very different world from the one I operate in now. Then I went independent, was independently a consultant for some time, and I started working with AI scale-ups because already as a consultant, I was kind of working on digital and data transformation tech topics. But when you work with, I don't want to call them big dinosaur companies, but they kind of are, and they know what they are. And you're looking at the cutting edge tech and you see all these cool up and coming startups. It's like, whoa, that's where the future is. I don't want to be making slide decks for the big guys. I want to be like in the action. So that's what I did. And I started working with them, advising. I started taking COO roles. Because most of the time, when you have a startup, you have a CEO and a CTO usually in the tech space. And then they suddenly have all this money and influx of capital. And they're like, shoot, we got to operate like a real company. And I was like, here I am. I can help with that. So I was doing that for some time. And then I took and kind of put on an investor hat more recently in the past couple of years. And I'm a partner in an investment management firm called Fifth Era, leading our AI strategy. So do all our AI investments. So I'm kind of very much in I've had a corporate professional lens to everything that I've done, alongside this red thread of the humanist angle. I've always gathered people. I had a side business running events and experiences and gatherings that bridge personal and professional well-being. I host one-day choirs and open mics. I am obsessed with the kind of, what did you call it? The spiritual.
With the spiritual weirdos unite.
Yeah.
We can always find each other. And you actually advise major US institutions on AI strategy.
Yeah, I do. And increasingly, I get to do that in the kind of AI and human flourishing sounds like a weird set of words to like a weird set of terms, but it's actually really becoming a thing. So, like UNESCO has this IEEE human flourishing initiative around AI that a friend of mine, Ileana, she's amazing, chairs. And so getting involved in that. And people are starting to take very seriously the ethical and responsible side of the tech equation, which is super promising to me.
Okay, so now that you've heard this, you know that Tallulah has this incredible, very kind of well-rounded look at this technology, as well as having very in-depth experience and familiarity with expertise on what is happening right now. Where have we been? Where are we going? What are the trends? And what better person to tell us in a grounded way about, yeah, sure, there are these risks. We all read about them, but also, what is the case for hope in the age of AI? So, what is the case for hope?
Well, yes, I love how you just prefaced it, because it is like saying, it's a grounded look. There are so many uncertainties right now. There's a lot of unknowns. This technology started being developed in the 50s. So in a way, it's as old as the internet itself. But we're in this inflection point that everyone can feel, where it's becoming this ubiquitous term. Everyone's using it. Every corporate's adopting it. So we're at this kind of like coming of age moment for AI. And so there's so much unknown. So the fear is really natural. And anytime I see these kind of doomsday headlines, like AI is taking your jobs, your industry is not going to exist, tomorrow, I became really fascinated with why the narrative had spun so negative. Because there are real risks, but it just seemed to be really sensationalized. So that's where this whole talk came from. Like, and the chapters of the book or the segments of the talk in the version you heard it are named based on those risks. Like AI is taking jobs, it's disrupting entire industries. But why hope? It sounds like this frivolous word, like, oh, hope. People always say to me, I love that you're so optimistic. And I'm like, I'm actually not. I consider myself a realist. Hope is not a nice to have thing, the same way joy is not some like accidental personality trait. Hope is a real discipline. And I take it incredibly seriously, and we all should, because our collective focus is very powerful and it shapes the future that we move into. And that's proven time and time again. People call it hyperstition, self-fulfilling prophecies, the Pygmalion effect. It's been researched, it's been studied, it's been proven. What we focus on grows. And so right now, with the collective all hearing this doomsday fear-based messaging, of course we're going to end up in dystopian future if that's what we're all focused on and we're not envisioning anything else. So it's actually critical. Like the biggest risk that I see is that there isn't enough platform, voice, attention given to the incredible things that are possible now with this technology so that we can build towards a more flourishing future.
And that's exactly what we're trying to contribute to
Yeah.
with this conversation. So because I asked to have this conversation because I see so much ambient fear, verging on paranoia, a lot of despair about like the AI is already ruining the world and there's no way to stop it. At the same time, a lot of these same people who are talking about the fear and despondence are also using AI and wondering, wait, am I using this to the best of my ability to like actually help me in my life while also feeling guilty about the fact that they're doing so? There's so much
Yeah.
conflicting emotions and motivations. And so I really hope that by the end of this conversation, people can feel aligned and congruent and clear and centered. Like this is why this is what I'm doing. This is why it's worth it. This is how we are using this to advance more of humanity being human, not the opposite, right?
Yeah, that is one of my key intentions is everything I say. And, I'm trying to translate also technical language information into plain language for everyone. So you can understand, what is this technology? Where are we going with it? And how can I see myself in that picture? Right. Because
Yes.
what you mentioned is one of the big issues, that people who do care about people who consider themselves humanists in any way, shape, or form, they don't want to touch this with a 20-foot pole. They're
Mhm.
like either boycotting the use of it itself, which is I can understand with the platforms that are currently available and lack of trust and things. But they're like, I don't want to touch it. It's going to be bad for us. And I'm like, well, it certainly will be if you're all leaning out,
Yeah,
right?
for
Like
sure.
you need them in this too. So that's a big rallying call of mine. Yeah.
I think part of what you're so effective is that you kind of disrupt this idea of this clean binary between AI versus human, like we're at odds with each other, or this is good or bad. It's just the reality is way too complex and nuanced for such sweeping announcements or judgments. And let's actually get into more
Yeah.
nitty gritty so that people can get a sense of what we're talking about. Is it okay if I take us through each of the major fears that people have and you can tell us a little bit about
Yep.
them? Okay, great.
Let's
So let's take the first big fear, which is that AI is taking our jobs. What do you say to that?
Yeah. Well, I start with that one because it's so close to home, right? It's like this is felt by people across industries, no matter what space they're working in. And it's happening now because it is disrupt almost every industry across the board. And there's a lot of there. So I will say, yes, AI is going to be incredibly disruptive to everything we conceive of as work right now. In fact, it's going to fundamentally shift what work even means to us as humans. And there's a lot of risks with that, especially in the next couple of years. There's this big job transition we have to navigate. People need to be reskilled or capabilities uplifted to even understand AI and the intersection of that with the work they're doing. And then there's this huge risk about who stands to benefit from this big transition. And that's probably one of the biggest ones of all. It's where you get into conversations about universal basic income and stuff like this. But what do I see? I think, you know, going back to what I was saying at the beginning of like these eras of human life on Earth, I I just offer the perspective that this modern definition of work that we've adopted as humans, where many of us, I think it's like 50% of us are in service industries, at least that's the statistics true in the US. A lot of us sit behind screens, we're on computers, it's kind of first of all, it's very modern. It's only the past couple decades we've been doing that. And it's pretty there's something kind of dystopian about it, right? Like a lot of us, we sit in big skyscrapers or we're in buildings, offices all day. We spend most of our time sedentary, sitting, we're hunched over screens. That's, we didn't always, that wasn't our definition of work always, right? Like when we were hunter gatherers, we spent half of our time in subsistence activities, literally hunting and gathering, as the name would suggest, and otherwise kind of creating, crafting, gathering, communing, exploring, etc. Then we became agrarians when we domesticated livestock and crops, and we were mostly farmer. Again, this is a US stat, but 90% of people in the US were farmers or cultivating kind of land and livestock. Then in the Industrial Revolution, we moved into factories. We have the rise of mass manufacturing. That's when you get the 9 to 5, like the clock in, clock out. How do we maximize productivity of humans? And so you get that kind of more, yeah, initially factory model, but the issue is we've co-opted it into this current digital information era we're in, except we're mostly on screens doing it. So the point being, our definition of work has shifted over time, and it's going to shift again. And I actually don't think like the disruption itself is not, in this case, I would welcome it, because I just think the way in which many of us work, again, I'm making generalizations, right? That's not true across the board. We're so disconnected and isolated, like from our physical body, right? Like I'm sitting here totally in my speaking to you on a totally intellectual level. I don't know what my legs are doing. Are they in pain? Am I like,
Yeah.
we're disconnected from each other. I mean, I'm here with you on a Zoom, but we're not, I'm alone in this location right now. And so it's kind of, I would argue that AI arrives, yes, as a great disrupting force, but like disruptive to what? This is what I always ask. Disruptive to what? Like, how did we get ourselves into this mode of operating? Is it really good for us as a species? And so I am so lucid about the next couple of years and how painful it will be to transition, and how we manage like livelihoods, how we support people through the transition. The fact that they've trained their whole lives for jobs that maybe won't exist. And like, I'm so lucid about all of this. And I literally, actually, I pray, grant us the courage to get through the next couple of years, because I think what's on the other side of that is vastly more flourishing than the mode of operating that we're in today.
What we call the world of work, you have said this, is already a giant disruption from the way, say, our great grandparents used to work,
Yeah.
which is probably a giant disruption from how it's much further back used to work. So, yes, things are being disrupted. Is it worth the disruption? And you talk about how so many of the jobs that are being disrupted today, like those weren't necessarily the jobs that people dreamed of having when they're kids. People
Yeah.
don't dream of data entry. People don't dream of, sitting in a cubicle and creating PowerPoint presentations, right? People don't dream of being an assembly line worker. And so this is the opportunity that we have to create a world where we are looking at the very idea of work in a much more expansive way. So how can we create more opportunities for humans to work in ways that actually support our flourishing? Because guess what? The existing world right now, or the world that has been, hasn't really been good at that. Right?
No, exactly. And the other thing, back to this point of like democratizing access, but right now, so many people work for a company or for a corporate. And so all of their creative energy, their spirit, it's funneling into something which is not kind of theirs. And when you talk about like wealth generation and collective prosperity and things kind of ties in, what AI does is lower the barriers again to build almost anything in this digital world, like to launch now your own website or your own business or like a marketplace online for some, product that you want to sell has never been easier. And so it gives people agency at very low cost in this new way. And I think that that's something that's really promising too. I mean, look, I used to work for the big corporates and I do still interface with them. I have to be honest and say that the structure of the corporate we've been used to in the past few decades is not going to exist in that way for much longer.
And that might not be a terrible thing altogether for humans.
Yeah, I don't think that it would be.
Let's leave that there.
Yeah.
I think people who are the most worried about disruptions are the ones who have the most to lose from it, which is why I think, as we've been talking about earlier, there's a lot more optimism about AI in more emerging economies, as we might say. So, can we talk about AI in education?
Yeah. So in the talk and I choose a couple industries specifically to kind of paint the picture of the disruption. Education's one of them. I start with that one also because it's very close to home, right? Like if you're a parent, people are really worried about AI disrupting their child's ability to learn and to think, and that they're using it to kind of cheat and bypass doing real thinking. And so again, there are real risks. There's at any time when you have tech innovation, I feel like you get shadow use of it early on, right? The internet was the same. Like in the early 2000s, it was all sexually explicit content and spam and pop-ups and like dark web, right? It's not that anymore. So similarly, we're at this early stage with AI. Of course, there's going to be less than ideal uses. Kids using it to write entire essays, and then the teachers have to put it through another AI software to spot that they plagiarize this whole thing, right? And so I'm again lucid about all that, but I'm just going to go straight to the reframe, which is the current model of academia has been the same for hundreds of years. And it's kind of that kind of sage on a stage, mostly passive listening model.
You sit down, you take notes, you do what the teacher says, memorize things, and hopefully get an A on the test.
Yeah, exactly. You take what you're told, you remember it, and then you regurgitate it, and then that's what gets you good grades. So, and again, I'm simplifying, right? Like there's great schools who aren't, but that's a predominant model. And so what strikes me about that is that it's not actually rooted in the science. It's not rooted in the science and psychology of how humans learn. Like, toddlers, when they're learning a language, they learn by doing. They try to speak, they say some words, they say it badly, they get feedback from their environment, they get a little better the next time. This passive model is not that. And two, it actually doesn't, like, what is it rewarding? It rewards having knowledge, right? You memorize it, you cram it into your head, and then you put it down on the test. So it's
the conventional existing system rewards having knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now that's not, there's no premium on that anymore because you have AI at your fingertips, which has all the knowledge. So it will force the education system to reward the application of knowledge instead.
Creative synthesis, creative idea generation. Like, what do you do with the knowledge that's uniquely human, that comes from your brain, your spirit?
Yep.
AI can't do that.
Exactly. So it will, it's again, it's very disruptive to academia, but disruptive in my view for the better, because now what classrooms have to be used for something different. We have to, project-based learning, getting hands-on, building things together, debate and dynamism, right? This is when you have that passive model, there's no space for what's your opinion? What's yours? How does it differ from mine? How does your lived experience mean that you think about this differently than I do? Let's debate. Let's discuss. Let's figure out, let's be curious about one another. There's no space for that when it's like, here's the fact and tell me it exactly as I told you it. So it will force classrooms also to be used more for that. And all of this is really positive, I think. Because many of us grew up in school systems, where we sat for long periods of time. School was almost preparing us for that 9-to-5 work.
100%. It was literally designed to herd us into this industrial work system.
Yeah, unfortunately. And so that model is not fit for purpose anymore in the world that we're moving into. So academia is having a little bit of an identity crisis right now. And I will say, one good pushback I get is it's centuries old, but there's something really beautiful about think of the Greeks, or Romans,
Okay, but to that, I was talking about this with my husband, who told me a really
Mhm.
funny story. Okay, like also like not funny but funny about how when he was, I don't know, like in middle school or something, he grew up in Korea and he was sitting in an English class where this Korean English, everyone was Korean. English teacher was teaching them words, and the teacher said this English word means this, and my husband knew somehow like I don't think that's what that means, and he's like, yes, it does. And then my husband kept being like, actually, I think you're wrong. And the teacher got so mad that he like beat my husband, which is all common in those days. Teachers could, physical punishment. But we were laughing about it now. But to me, that is what has to happen, even if physical punishment is not what happens. When the teacher's authority rests on having more knowledge than students, and
Mhm.
if that authority is threatened because a student knows more than you, or you are wrong about something that you thought you knew, then that entire authority comes into question. And then what happens to the classroom then? Right. So in a way, that's very understandable. So if the teacher isn't necessarily characterized as the one that has more knowledge, if that's not the teacher's rule, then what is? And the answer is what you talked about in the times of Socrates, right? Because what they were doing isn't just Socrates, giving people information, knowledge to memorize. It was something much more dynamic and relational, right?
Yep. Yeah. It's exactly like, so again, so many teachers studied to be the bearers of knowledge. And so it's threatening to them. Now their role though, and it is like, connector, orchestrator, aggregator, facilitator,
Yeah.
uh, interesting interaction in the classroom of dialogue, of discourse, of projects, of hands-on learning. So it's a real shift in, again, what being a teacher means. But I think that's a beautiful shift. Again, it's like with always the pushback to all these things is fear of like my identity and what I thought I was setting myself up for in my life is now having to change, which is so understandable. It's so completely human. And I just try to bring people out of that and say, like, but is it bad for us as a species? Is this bad for us?
Yeah.
Not always. It could,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, can we, first of all, I have a toddler son. I would love for him to grow up in a world where in schools he is taught to navigate knowledge wisely and intelligently as opposed to just absorb knowledge.
Yeah. Cause it's like, the big fear around education is we're going to become less intelligent. And then there's this whole, I then
Go there. Let's go there.
cause
What about it?
what about it? So, we've been talking about parts of this, like, yes, if we over rely on AI, which we kind of are in this moment now of it's this new thing and we're using it for almost everything. And we lose a lot of our, you know, internal sense check. We just assume the information that it's giving us is true. We if the models are biased in the information they're giving us, it can proliferate bias, and that's a own issue in its own right. And like in the case of students, but any of us, actually real deep mastery, like if we go back to Socratic times we're talking about, comes from wrestling with things, like not knowing them initially and having to wrestle with them, like deeply struggle to wrap our mind around it. That's when we get deep mastery. And yeah, it's called productive struggle. So there's all these concerns about what AI will do to our intelligence. And there's even studies on like the gray matter in our brains. And is it shrinking because when we over rely on AI? Okay, this is my favorite reframe in the whole. I could talk about, I think I need to do a second book on lost intelligences. So I say, I'm going to ask you the question, you can answer it. So, Simone, what do you think intelligence is? How would you define intelligence?
Well, I feel like I have an unfair advantage because I already listened to your talk. But
Okay, when you did it, just what would you say?
well, I mean, based on my work, which is so spiritual and ancestral, my instinct is to harken back to the intelligences that my ancestors had, of which cognitive intelligence was just one form. Very, very valued form for sure. My culture very much values book learning. Yes, we that was important, but also intelligence about relating to the land, about relating to the seasons, intelligence when it comes to how to relate to the spiritual world, intelligence. Like, for example, I think a lot about how, like, in our traditional culture, just the whole table of food for a meal contains so much intelligence about science, about nature, spirituality, relationality, all these things that are and nutrition that's just compressed into just a simple mealtime ritual. And so I think we have so many dimensions of intelligence, but that's not what most people.
I'm just laughing because I'm like, okay, Simone basically told you guys the reframe here. Usually when I ask people like, what's intelligence, or in my talk, I get people to mime out what's intelligence, and they do like the thinker pose, and they
Yeah.
do like, the point is we associate intelligence, at least in this era of human life on Earth, with our cognition, with our brain, with the mind, and what the brain can do. And in fact, we are so over indexed on it. We spend almost all our time completely in that sphere, like above the neck. And that hasn't been a bad thing. Like all of this incredible innovation, look at the world around us that we've built, for better or for worse. It's remarkable what humans have achieved because of our cognitive intelligence as a, evolutionary advantage as a species. But we've gone so far. The pendulum has swung so far into, to the extent that, as I said, we're hunched over screens, completely in our brain space all day, disconnected from our physical bodies. And so we as a species have forgotten that intelligence was never just what our brain could do. Our brain is one organ, a remarkable organ whose job it is, by the way, is to keep us alive, not to thrive, not to make us happy, but literally just to keep us alive. And we have completely gone so far in the direction of hedging all of our self-worth, identity, how we spend all of our time in the realm of the mental. We worship at the altar of the brain is a funny as a slide, but I
100%. Yeah.
so I say we've created artificial intelligence, which we can offload cognition to.
So
It's a tool that actually does cognition better and faster and more effectively than we do. No wonder we're having an identity crisis. We thought that's all we are. So
it's
we're
like
like,
when we should have diversified, we went all in on cognitive intelligence. And when AI comes and can do cognitive intelligence better, we're like, oh no, we should have diversified.
great. We're like, oh my God, this was our evolutionary competitive advantage as a species. Now it's being taken away.
Yeah.
We're having an identity crisis, but it's
Oh my God.
exactly what it's that. Human intelligence is so much more magical. It's so much broader than just what our brain can do. And it's all the things you were saying. So I talk about the opportunity to restore us to waylaid forms of human intelligence, which includes our somatic intelligence, the wisdom and connection with our physical body as an animal body, first and foremost, and all the things that it signals to us, tells us on a regular basis that we're out of touch with when we spend all our time in the realm of the psyche. Our ecological intelligence, which you mentioned, our connection with the land, our connection with the land. We lived on and by and off the land. We were so in tune with its rhythms, with its cycles. We knew what to eat, how, when. We could navigate by it. There was no separation. And that intelligence, something that's been massively lost, but has an opportunity to be restored. And then the third I talk about is communal and collective intelligence, which is that we lived for most of human history very collectively, and we worked and lived and prayed and loved, and all as a collective. We regulated our nervous systems together. We were in ritual together. We celebrated, we grieved, we all collectively. And we've gone, because when you have a focus on the mind, you get this also hyper individualization that has made us sick, really, as a species, and lonely. We have a crisis of loneliness, and an opportunity to restore that. So I'll pause there for a second. There's so much more I could say about
I know. There's so much more. But I just want to interject here and say, I talk a lot about decolonization in my work, and not going beyond decolonization, because like going against and undoing colonization is one thing, but also building on what needs to replace it,
Yeah.
building the world that can replace the colonized world. And I just think that all of us who are interested in that should be really excited. Yes, of course, there's cautions, there are birthing pains. We're not being delusional about that, but also this is one of my favorite rants. Something important changed, and not for the better, when Rene Descartes in the Enlightenment, pronounced, "I think, therefore I am." Right? My cognitive ability is what defines my very existence. And that was at the time a very novel, subversive idea in the history of humans and how we understood ourselves and our place in the universe. And I think what has happened in the world since over the past few centuries has shown us, unfortunately, the sort of disruptive ramifications to reducing our humanity and our worth to our cognitive intelligence. And now that that is all about to be severely disrupted, what an opportunity we have
Yes.
to invite in and cultivate and celebrate other forms of intelligence. This is one of the things I think about all the time. Like, my mom tells me stories of her grandmother in like pre-industrial Korea who would just like look at someone and be like, "Oh yeah, like this thing's gonna happen to you in 3 months." And they'd be like, "What the fuck? How do you know that?" And lo and behold, that exact thing would happen. And it's not because my grandmother was special. The people used to all the time just casually have these abilities,
Yes.
powers,
Yes.
intelligences that are like, what to us, but it is all of our inheritance as well. I am positive you have ancestors who could do that. Anyone who's listening, you have ancestors who had powers and intelligences that have been like conditioned out of us via the dominance of cognition. And well, what an opportunity to reclaim it.
Oh my gosh, okay. So in the book, I intentionally, at least for this book, I don't foray into spiritual language or concepts.
Next book.
Next book. This is, look, and I don't want to necessarily, it's not necessarily about women in particular, but as a species, like, for sure. I mean, we create life, right? We are portals literally to life. So we have this attunement to, you know, whatever you believe is a higher or broader source or conscious universe, God, whatever you want to call it. And so what you're talking about is a real thing. Like and there are people who still make a living being mediums and oracles and healers, and they do Reiki work or physical touch healing or even,
Divination, tarot
worse.
card readings, all of it.
And I look at this, look, as you say that, like literally my tarot.
Yay.
Okay. So the point is we had those attunements. And if anyone's read the book, It Didn't Start With You, there's fascinating explanation of why these abilities got shut down, which is basically, they look at more studies of grandchildren of Holocaust survivors and how they had that those experiences of trauma passed down through the DNA and encoded. The grandchildren would, when they ate, they would be like eating as if were starving, or they had this like traumatic memory living within their physical body and their soma that they had not directly lived through. And so it's just this, it proves the point that, even in just a generation or two, we can encode into our DNA traits that will help our offspring better survive. And so if you think about the persecution of, well, I would say people with kind of spiritual gifts, psychic attunement, in particular women, the burning of the witches, all these things that happen over time, of course, then those women are going to encode into their DNA to shut down from those forms of intelligence
100%.
in order to ensure survival. And so something really exciting that's happening now is almost like the coming back online of those immense. And it's happening as people, I think, remember. I love the word remember. You were talking about building what comes next, right? And it is a building, but I also see it as a remembering. And not and a remembering, because it's already within us, but also a remembering. Like, to remember something is to put it back together.
So good.
And so it is what comes next. We're moving from this world where we valued information, knowledge, spending decades learning a certain craft, mastering your expertise. And a lot of our power structures and systems are
I'm gonna say it's masculine stuff.
Of course. Yeah, of course. We've also swung that direction too, which we'll probably get into. In the future, even if you just, there's a lot of discussion around shifting from valuing skills to more kind of innate human capabilities and traits.
Yes.
So in the future, you're not a great leader if you know, I don't know, a ton about a certain scientific topic, because again, you have knowledge at your fingertip. Instead, you're a great leader if you can corral a group of people. You can get the best out of all of them in terms of cooperation. You're very adaptable. You can pivot quickly, reprioritize. You're resilient, and you're good at kind of connective reasoning and kind of empathy and intuition. So we're going to start to value those traits again. And that means they come back online in a stronger way. And here's the other thing I'll say about it. A lot of, especially if we talk about these forms of wisdom and kind of spiritual psychic intelligence, those live within our physical body as well.
Yes. Yes.
And so, like the fact we're so disconnected, I talked about we live the neck up. That's one of the reasons that we've gotten out of touch with those abilities. And as all of us, and, for me, women, and this is so important as well, when we stop fighting our body or we overcome the conditioning that tells us to be at odds with our body and constantly trying to like shrink or make it look a certain way, when we reconnect with its wisdom, that's when those forms, those capabilities within us can reawaken and flow through again. So it's just like the most magical time. And I don't go into any of this in my books or talk.
Next book. I just
Yeah.
have this image of all of our ancestors in whatever dimension realm they're in, just like so excited. Oh, I can turn this switch back on and I can,
Okay.
channel these gifts for this descendant now because now it's safe and these powers are going to be needed to create the world that's coming.
Yes. Yeah.
So exciting.
It really is that, like, at the end of my book, I had these postcards from imagined futures as an epilogue. And I was writing one of them and I just started to cry and cry because I wrote this sentence that was like, from the perspective of someone 100 years from now or something. And they have this moment of, I wrote, that they're thinking back on their ancestors, which in that case will be us, right? And the fact that they believed that this type of world was possible.
Human
And
descendants?
well, like, so, it's 100 years from now. And it's
From
like,
now. Okay, never mind.
from now,
Yeah.
our descendants,
Right. Yeah.
the ancestors
Yeah.
people who believed that this type of world was possible again, against all the conditioning, all the odds, all of the big, living in this dystopia of skyscrapers and disconnection. But some of us who can see and believe that flourishing human future is possible, where all of these things come back online, where we're remembered and restored to what it really means to be human. We believed in it through all the fucking noise, and we advocated for it in the hardest moment. Yeah, I started to cry and cry because I was like, that is what I'm here for. It was like, so that 100 years from now, someone is like, thank God there was a few delusional people who just believed this was possible.
And I think that's why what you talk about is so different from like the sort of like bro-y, everything's going to be great. Technology's going to solve all our problems, right? Because I think very aware, smart people are, for a good reason, very wary of that kind of optimism that bypasses real concerns. But I think where you are oriented is just so different, right? It's not, you're not saying that technology is going to be our salvation. You are saying, let's like consider the long arc of human history and all the changes that we've been through. Here's where we are. How do we go back? How do we use this technology to go back to restoring the fundamental things that make us human? And AI can be one of those tools, depending on where we put our focus, where we put our imagination going forward, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I get, like, that's why I don't like when people say, oh, the techno optimist view or the positive view. I'm like, please don't lump me in with that. Not to say that, like, I admire still what some of those people are trying to do in a sense, but I get the lack of trust because it's like, well, what do you stand to gain? And even for me, I'm like, there's, I get that. I get that line of questioning and that wariness.
Yeah. And I think that's important. I think that's what makes your argument credible. That's part one. In the next episode, Tallulah and I get into the environment and mental health and AI's relationship with both. And I think that might be the most powerful part of this whole conversation. So don't miss it. In the meantime, you can go find Tallulah and connect with her. Her book is called A Case for Hope, and she's on LinkedIn, and on Instagram, she is at The Case for Hope. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.